Our lives today are incredibly complicated, but today is going to be simple. For this Good Friday service, I would invite you to simply listen to the story. I will be reading today from Luke chapter 22 into 23 from the Common English Bible. This is simply the story of Jesus from Thursday night after Maundy Thursday until Friday evening. As I read this, I invite you to close your eyes, to take a moment of reflection and prayer, to simply hear the story with new ears. Here is our reading today. Jesus left and made his way to the Mount of Olives, as was his custom, and the disciples followed him. When he arrived, he said to them, "Pray that you won't give in to temptation." He withdrew from them about a stone's throw, knelt down and prayed. He said, "Father, if it's your will, take this cup of suffering away from me. However, not my will, but your will must be done." Then a heavenly angel appeared to him and strengthened him. He was in anguish and prayed even more earnestly. His sweat became like drops of blood falling onto the ground. When he got up from praying, he went to the disciples, and he found them asleep. Overcome by grief, he said to them, "Why are you sleeping? Get up and pray so that you won't give in to temptation." While Jesus was still speaking, a crowd appeared, and the one called Judas of the 12 was leading them. He approached Jesus to kiss him. Jesus said to him, "Judas, why would you betray the human one with a kiss?" When those around him recognized what was about to happen, they said, "Lord, should we fight them with our swords?" One of them struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. But Jesus responded, "No, stop, no more of this." He touched the slave's ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests, the officers of the temple guard, and the elders who had come to get him, "Have you come with swords and clubs to arrest me as though I were a thief? Day after day I was with you in the temple, but you didn't arrest me. But this is your time when darkness rules." After they arrested Jesus, they led him away and brought him to the high priest's house. Peter followed from a distance. When they lit a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat among them. Then a servant woman saw him sitting in the firelight. She stared at him and said, "Hey, this man was with him too." But Peter denied it, saying, "Woman, I don't know him." A while later, someone else saw him and said, "No, you're one of them too." But Peter said, "Man, I am not." An hour or so later, someone else insisted, "This man must have been with him because he's a Galilean too." Peter responded, "Man, I don't know what you're talking about." At that very moment, while he was still speaking, a rooster crowed. The Lord turned and looked straight at Peter, and Peter remembered the Lord's words when he said, "Before a rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times." And Peter went out and cried uncontrollably. The men who were holding Jesus in custody taunted him while they beat him. They blindfolded him and asked him repeatedly, "Prophesy, who hit you?" Insulting him, they said many other horrible things against him. As morning came, the elders of the people, both chief priests and legal experts, came together, and Jesus was brought before their council. They said, "If you are the Christ, tell us." He answered them, "If I tell you, you won't believe. And if I ask you a question, you won't answer. But from now on, the human one will be seated on the right side of the power of God." And they all said, "Oh, so are you God's son then?" He replied, "Well, you say that I am." Then they said, "Why do we need further testimony? We've heard it from his own lips." The whole assembly got up and led Jesus to Pilate and began to accuse him. They said, "We have found this man misleading our people, opposing the payment of taxes to Caesar, and claiming that he is the Christ, a king." Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus replied, "Well, that's what you say." Then Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowds, "I find no legal basis for action against this man." But they objected strenuously, saying, "Oh, he agitates the people with his teaching throughout all of Judea, starting from Galilee and all the way down here." Hearing this, Pilate asked if the man was a Galilean. When he learned that Jesus was from Herod's district, Pilate sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at that time. Herod was very glad to see Jesus, for he had heard all about Jesus and wanted to see him for quite some time. He was hoping to see Jesus perform some miracle. Herod questioned Jesus at length, but Jesus would not respond to him. The chief priests and the legal experts were there, fiercely accusing Jesus all the while. Herod and his soldiers treated Jesus with contempt. Herod mocked him by dressing Jesus in elegant clothes and sent him back to Pilate. Pilate and Herod became friends with each other that day. Before this, they'd been enemies. Then Pilate called together the chief priests, the rulers, and all the people, and he said to them, "You brought this man before me as one who was misleading the people. I have questioned him in your presence and found nothing in this man's conduct that provides a legal basis for the charges you have brought against him. Neither did Herod, because Herod returned him to us. He's done nothing that deserves death. Therefore, I have whipped him and then let him go." But with one voice they all shouted, "Away with this man! Release Barabbas to us!" Now Barabbas had been thrown into prison because of a riot that had occurred in the city, and for murder. Pilate addressed them again because he wanted to release Jesus. They kept shouting out, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" And for the third time, Pilate said to them, "Why? What wrong has this man done? I found no legal basis for the death penalty in this case. Therefore, I will have him whipped and then let him go." But they were adamant, shouting their demands that Jesus be crucified. Their voices eventually won out. Pilate issued his decision to grant their request. He released the one they asked for, who had been thrown into prison because of a riot and for murder, but he handed Jesus over to their will. As they led Jesus away, they grabbed Simon, a man from Cyrene who was coming in from the countryside. They put the cross on his back and made him carry it behind Jesus. A huge crowd of people followed Jesus, including women who were mourning and wailing for him. Jesus turned to the women and said, daughters of Jerusalem, don't cry for me. Rather cry for yourselves and for your children. The time will come when they will say, oh, happy are those who are unable to become pregnant, the wombs that never gave birth, and the breasts that never nursed a child. And then they will say to the mountains, oh, fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. And if they do these things when the trees are green, what will happen when they're dry? They also led 2 other criminals to be executed with Jesus. When they arrived at the place that's called the Skull, they crucified him, along with the criminals on his right and the other on his left. Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they are doing. And they drew lots as a way of dividing up his clothing. The people were standing around watching, but the leaders sneered at them, saying, oh, he saved others, huh? Let him save himself if he is really the Christ sent from God, the chosen one. The soldiers also mocked him. They came up to him, offering him sour wine, and saying, "Oh, if you really are the king of you Jews, why don't you save yourself?" Above his head was a notice of the formal charge against him. It read, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals hanging next to Jesus insulted him. "Aren't you the Christ? Why don't you save yourself and us while you're at it?" Responding, the other criminal harshly spoke to him, saying, "Don't you fear God, saying that you've also been sentenced to die? We are rightly condemned, for we are receiving the appropriate sentence for what we did, but this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said to Jesus, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus replied, "I assure you that today you will be with me in paradise." It was now about noon, and darkness covered the whole earth until about 3 o'clock, when the sun stopped shining. Then the curtain in the sanctuary tore down the middle. Crying out in a loud voice, Jesus said, "Father, into your hands I entrust my life." After he said this, he breathed for the very last time. When the centurion saw what had happened, he praised God, saying, "It's really true. This man was righteous." All the crowds who have come to see this event returned to their homes, beating their chests after seeing what had happened. And everyone who knew him, including the women who had followed him from Galilee, stood at a distance observing all of these things. Now, there was a man named Joseph, who was a member of the council. He was a good and righteous man. He hadn't agreed with the plan and the actions of the council. He was from the Jewish city of Arimathea and eagerly anticipated God's kingdom. This man went to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. Taking it down, he wrapped it in a linen cloth and laid it in a tomb carved out of the rock, in which no one had ever been buried. It was the preparation day for the Sabbath, and the Sabbath was quickly approaching. The women who had come with Jesus from Galilee followed Joseph. They saw the tomb and how Jesus' body was laid in it. Then they went away and prepared fragrant spices and perfumed oil. They rested on the Sabbath in keeping with the commandment.